With all the new technology and the abundance of information on the web, you would think that buying or selling or understanding the real estate market would be easier than ever. But ask yourself one question. Now that you've done your homework and you think you know what's going on, what do you do next? Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our blog, our weekly blog with Fournier and Fournier. My name is Stewart Fournier. I'm an 18-year veteran of the real estate world. My wife and I, Randy, practice real estate here in the Los Angeles area, specifically the South Bay areas, the South Bay beaches. We have a combination of experience of 35 years plus in the business, and we are doing this blog on a weekly basis. I can't believe it's actually, I think, the 11th or 12th week we've been doing this, to dispel a lot of myths about real estate, to dispel a lot of misconceptions about how the real estate world works. And what we get into here is more specifics than, for example, you might be able to find on the web. We get into actual detail, we get into the actual mechanics of a transaction so that you're much more educated about how to handle what can be an extremely stressful situation for months, in fact. We've had people for almost years and sometimes just a matter of weeks looking at homes. So we've run the gamut of everyone's level of emotions, everyone's level of sense of research. And so what we wanted to do was put this blog together to help you in that process. And we hope we've been doing that for the last 11 weeks. We pick a particular subject and tear it apart at length. And when I mean at length, really only about 10 to 15 minutes. We like to keep it short on these blogs. But more importantly, what we'd like to do is encourage you to also participate. This is Facebook Live, and I like to bribe my audiences to ask questions because, as you know, very few people actually are watching it live, but it's important that we do have some interaction. And even if you're seeing this taped at a later time, please feel free to ask any questions down in the comment section. Be happy to answer them. And also, I'd like to suggest if you have a particular subject you'd like me to tear apart and get into specifically, I'm happy to do that. No matter where you are in the country, go ahead and ask. Obviously, we're here in California. I'm licensed in California, and I'll be answering questions specifically to California. However, in the real estate world throughout the country, the themes and the approaches and the modalities to practice real estate are pretty similar, so I can generalize pretty well outside of California. So feel free to make any suggestions or allow me to attack a subject that you'd like to know more about. Today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about HOAs. I've had a lot of sort of negative experiences with a particular HOA, so it's uppermost in my mind, and I'd like to get into maybe a better perception or some more education about how HOAs work, what their purpose is, and how it's extremely important for you to understand what your role is in your HOA if you happen to belong to one. But before I do, I wanted to follow up from last week's broadcast about multiple offers. Multiple offers is a very complicated subject matter, and we actually took two blog posts, or 2 weeks worth, to explain it, and that gives you an indication of how dynamic and how complicated it can be. And there was one small thing that I missed on the last broadcast that I'd like to continue to talk about before we get into HOAs. And it's an aspect that I think you should be aware of when you're in a multiple bid situation. That is that you're in a situation where other people are competing to buy a house. There's, for example, a specific deadline that you have to get your offer in, and you might be up against 5, 10, 20, in some cases even 30 people. Make sure to see our two last broadcasts. I get into it specifically as to what your approach should be, and also what some of the shortcuts are that you can compete with. And I think I broke it down very specifically, and I wanted to make sure that everyone got the idea that they really do have a good chance, even if there are a lot of people involved in a multiple bid situation. And the one last thing I wanted to talk about is what's called a best and final. Now, many times listing agents become overwhelmed with the amount of phone calls and the amount of inquiries that they get when there's a multiple bid situation. You have to realize that, for example, with say 10 offers, there are probably a good 50 to 60 people, if not more, involved in wanting to know if they can get a particular house. And an agent's going to hear from either representatives of those people or those people themselves in that period in time. So they tend to say, you know, it's a little much for the brain to handle. So what they usually do is they go to the seller, that is their client, and they tell them, you know, there's a lot of promises made and there's a lot of people that want to strategize to buy this house. And so what we'd like to do is, hello Dave, good to see you. What we'd like to do, Dave, if you ask a question, you'll get a coffee bean card. And if you are in that situation as a listing agent, what ends up happening is you have a lot of explaining to do to your seller, and it's overwhelming for the seller. So usually what happens a lot of times is the listing agent will tell everybody that's made an offer to hang off because, or not to hang off, but to go ahead and make your offer. However, there's going to be what's called a best and final. And what a best and final is the ability to actually see all the offers that have really come in, see the people that are experienced and want to, I'm getting interrupted here. He says, why isn't this on the beach? Thanks, Dave. He's just trying to interrupt me. Okay. What the situation is that you may have 10 offers. They've all submitted them, and you want to answer them all. You're obligated to answer them all. And what do you do at this point? Well, a lot of times what sellers will do is say, you know what, I want to really see all the offers, I want to see them in writing, and I want to see who's serious and who's not, respective of the price, respective of the contingencies, those kinds of things. So what they'll do is they'll advise the buyer's agents, those agents that are submitting the offer, they'll advise them to not necessarily give the best price right away, because they know that there's going to be another round wherein they're going to do what's called a counter offer. And I'll get into that in a subsequent video. I've described in part what a counter offer is, but I don't want to get off track here. So basically what that means is when there's going to be a best and final, when you hear that term, there's going to be a best and final, what it should mean to you is that you don't necessarily have to give your best price right then and there, because there's going to be another round of submitting your offer again, and it's at that point when they're going to decide that you probably should come up with the best price that you think should be offered for that particular house. Okay, so again, when you hear the term best and final, not sure what happened there. Guess I hit the wrong thing. Okay. When you hear the term best and final, understand that you should not be necessarily, and you can consult with your buyer's agent on this, you should not necessarily be giving your best offer respective of the price. So be aware of that. Again, it's strategy, it's complicated, it's something that you definitely want to go over with your agent about. The reason you need a real estate agent, especially in a multiple bid situation. Okay? If you have any questions about that, please feel free to put it in the comment section, and I'll be happy to go over it in detail, or just give me a call and I'll be happy to assist you with that as well. Okay, so let's talk about HOAs. HOAs, as soon as you hear the term, as soon as you get involved in a HOA, there's more negative repercussions than positive, unfortunately, nowadays. And let me describe what an HOA actually is first, because it's important to understand that so you have a little bit of stress taken off your shoulders. An HOA basically is the organization within your condo, within your excuse me, within your complex, that is looking over the best interest, for the best interest, and the maintenance of your complex. And one of the things I'd like you to do when you're getting a sense of the HOA is realize that you, as an owner, are the HOA. It's important that you understand that concept because a lot of times people, and this is probably the biggest mistake that I see people make, the biggest mistake people make is they view the HOA as a separate entity from where they have their property. In other words, it's some organization or it's somebody that does looks over the property. You're not quite sure how it works. You're not quite sure who's involved, but you just sort of feel as though it's an entity that's working and you're not a part of it. Well, that's probably the biggest mistake that you can make. You see, because everyone who belongs to that property is a member of the HOA. And this is probably the worst analogy I can give because it's going to be emotional, but I'm going to tell you really how you should look at this. The HOA is a little bit of a family. And I know that some of you who've been involved in HOAs that are dysfunctional, and dysfunctional families are hardly a rare breed, but that's exactly what they are. They're not an entity that's governmental. They're not an entity that's beyond the scope of your influence. They're not an entity that's out of control. They are you. You are part of that family. And when you get involved in a HOA, it's really, really important that you feel that way. No matter how dysfunctional it may be, you have to get along. And the reason that you have to get along, more importantly, is strictly financial. Aside from just getting along as human beings, that's one thing. But the more important thing, and we're talking about real estate here, the more important thing is that you get along because ultimately the ability to get along will reflect what the value of your property is. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that unless the HOA is effectively doing what it's supposed to do, and that means you and everybody else involved is working towards reaching the goals of the HOA, the property will suffer. Now, the property will suffer because the maintenance on the property will deteriorate. And when the maintenance on the property deteriorates because there's a lot of infighting or there's a lot of misunderstandings, that will reflect on the value of your property. That is to say, if the maintenance is not being kept up and there's too much conflict within the organization itself, the end result is always that things are not going to be looked after on the property like they should. And that's a shame because that will definitely affect your pocketbook. What's going to end up happening is that the outskirts of the building itself, for example, and certainly the internal parts of the building may be neglected because people are arguing. And that's the most important variable that contributes to the devaluation of your property, because when someone goes to sell their property, guess what? They have to disclose that. The HOA has to disclose, they have a legal obligation to disclose everything that's happening within the HOA. And not only that, but it has to be documented in the meetings that they are supposed to have periodically during the year. And if they are not, and the buyer buys the house, the HOA can actually become legally liable for those non-disclosures if those disclosures aren't given freely and correctly at the time of the buy. So an HOA is an extremely important concept that every one of you, as the family member of that HOA, need to take into account. I've seen a lot of HOAs not get along. I've seen a lot of HOAs with strong personalities wherein someone wants to take control. And what I have, the suggestion that I have for you in a situation like that is to be as communicative as possible, communicate as much as possible within a formal meeting, as well as the person who's taken on the responsibility to be, for example, the president of the HOA. The president of the HOA, whether it's 3 units or it's 300 units, has taken on an enormous responsibility and should be respected for the amount of time and energy that they're going to give to that responsibility, because chances are they're not even being paid for it, and it's a lot of work. There is a lot of work involved in being some of the officers or the presidents of the HOAs. My suggestion is that you be respectful of that and approach them in that regard, appreciating, and you will get a lot further along if you give them that sense of appreciation and suggestion. But understand that in spite of people's particular position on an HOA board, they do hold a power, somewhat a power of position with respect of the organization. But you as a member are as represented as they are in terms of your opinion and in terms of your concerns. And so what I'm trying to say in the long run here is please understand that this is your organization and you have the rights to, just like anybody else, whether they're the president or not, to become involved to make sure that things are going in the right direction. If there's an argument over that, be respectful of the argument and understand that in an argument, if there's going to be a solution or a situation, doesn't have to necessarily just be an argument. If there's a situation, the only solution is if everyone comes to terms and realizes that there has to be a little give in order to move forward. And that may not always be the outcome that you want, but the important thing is that you're communicating and everybody's concerns are getting up there, are getting understood. Okay? So, HOAs, definite reflection on the value of the property. Definitely want to disclose everything that's a concern to the membership. And then, of course, the financial position of the HOA, which, of course, is the most important thing when it comes to someone buying or selling in your complex. Now, banks take a very serious look at the HOA when there's a buy or a sell. Now, why do they do that? Well, it's obvious. If banks see that your HOA is not sufficiently solvent or sufficiently financed or has lawsuits against it or gets a sense that there's a lot of conflict and not a whole lot of resolution in your HOA, they will not give a loan to the person that wants to buy in your complex. And obviously, if that's the situation, it's a very serious situation for you, because if no one can get a loan as a result of the financial status of your HOA, then the value of your property goes down. And it goes down significantly. If the units, if buyers can't get a loan, again, I'm going to repeat that. If buyers cannot get a loan because the HOA is in disarray and there's a financial situation where they say that it's not solvent, no one can get a loan on your complex, and that's a big deal. So your place becomes definitely negative on the marketing aspect, and as a result, the value of your property is going to go down. So it's very important that HOAs be in an organized fashion and that they be presented to banks in a way that makes them look good. So we're at 18 minutes. I'm going to cut it off there. I know I got more philosophical about HOAs than I did specific, but there was a reason for that. And the reason is that I see a lot of conflict and I see a lot of disparity with regard to relationships. And those are the things that eventually become financially difficult, have financial implications for your value, for your property value. So I probably overstated it, but it's just very, very important. One other thing before we go off the air about HOAs is I want to say, if you have 3 units or more, it's a responsible thing to do to have a management company actually watch over your complex and be respective of and also represent the HOA as a maintenance relationship. Now, what I mean by that is management companies are not in charge of the HOA, but they certainly know all the rules and regulations that HOAs must follow. And so if you have a management company that oversees the complex and is connected to the HOA and advises the HOA, the banks really like that. So I would suggest you get a management company. And a management company also will aid you in some of the things I've talked about in this broadcast. The management company will take the time to explain to you, for example, the laws and new regulations that seem to come up every year, and they will also be sort of counsel, not legal counsel, to some of the specifics in terms of the deadlines or reports or different evaluations of your HOA. And they're definitely worth it because those things can be extremely time-consuming, and management companies make it a lot easier. So that's my best suggestion as far as an HOA that has 3 or more units. Even 3 units, it might be a good idea. 2 units, that's a whole different subject. 2 units sometimes don't even have an HOA that's active. If you want to know what exactly that means, give me a call because I don't want to have this video go on too much longer. So, with any questions, I don't have anybody except Dave who just wanted to sort of throw me off here. Okay. Again, if you get a chance, we're going to put down in the comments section a link to a terrific app that we push every time on this show. It's the Fournier app, and what it does is it allows you to take a picture of any house in America. Just literally take your cell phone, take any picture of a house in the country, and it'll give you the value. If it's listed, it'll give you all the information about the listing. It will tell you the last time it was sold. It'll give you the schools in the area. It will tell you the value of the houses right next door. It'll tell you if there's an open house. It's really an involved and very thorough app that, in my opinion, is way better than Redfin or Zillow or any of those other apps. It's really sort of the revolutionary app. So please feel free to download it. We'll give you a link. You download it, and then you'll be connected. And just so you know, the best part about that is that you can actually talk to us on that app directly, real time. The app is real time, by the way, respective of listings and everything else. They update it, I think, every 15 minutes or so. So please feel free to download that app, and you can have a conversation with us. Once again, we won't see that you're on the app when you're using it, but if you'd like to take a picture of a house and get more information specifically about the house, although that app's pretty thorough, you can actually talk to us directly on the app itself. We'll see it and we'll be able to answer you right on our phone. Okay. So again, if you have a suggestion that you'd like, or a subject matter that you'd like me to cover, please feel free to. I knew that was going to happen. Please feel free to ask it, and I'll be happy to tear apart. We do this every Tuesday at 10 a.m. We'll see you next time. Again, the Fournier Fournier blog every Tuesday at 10 a.m. 10 o'clock Tuesday. We'll see you next time, everyone. Bye bye.